welcome to Dr. Beghani and to Professor Ihsan. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. You're both extremely welcome. As you know, we have a short time. We shall try and keep our questions short. I'll be very grateful if you could likewise keep your answers short. You may find that we're coming on to a subject you're seeking to answer, but you're very, very welcome. So if I can start us off, Nus, you're keen to...
Thank you, Chairman. If I could start with you, Professor Ihsan, what makes the Kurds politically or culturally distinctive in the Middle East?
Thank you. Well, I think a lot of things makes Kurds distinctive to other nations in the Middle East. Genetically, I think they are Indo-European or European backgrounds, and they speak different language. They are multi-religious cultures, not like just related to one sector or one religion. They have Christian Kurds, Jewish Kurds, Muslim Kurds, Yazidi Kurds, and Kaki Kurd, different things. And the language is distinguished. And for me, as an expert in that part of the world, I think Kurds, they have a vision, looking forward vision, not like some other nations in the area. They are redigging their past and they are living in their past. More life lovers, freedom lovers. I find them like that in culturally. Politically, even politically, they are different from others. They have multi-party systems. They approved since 1991 until now. They are not a threat to any regional power. They managed to hold all the communities together after the ISIS crisis, after what happens in civil wars in Iraq between Syria and Sunnis as well. I think that was the base for tolerance and political tolerance in Kurdistan.
When you said that they are genetically different, does that suppose that most Kurds marry other Kurds?
Not marry other Kurds, but if, in Middle East nations are, for example, Arabs, they think that we are coming from Yemen. All of them, they descended from there. Kurds, they have different things. It's by the nationalism is imagined community for me as an expert in national identity. But they think they are different from others. And they've been struggling for their freedom since the beginning of 20th century until now. This is why I think they are freedom's lover comparing to others. And the vision they have in their mind, we find out after 2003, despite of all what's going on in Iraq and liberation, or somebody name it occupation, the majority of Iraqi, they started to redig their past and they want to rediscover the history, go back 1,400 years back. But Kurds, since 1991, they were always looking forward to more developed, in a state of looking to Tehran and Qom and Ankara. They were looking at London, Paris, DC, different liberal point of view. And
when Daesh arrived on the scene, did the Kurds feel a particular threat because of their distinctive heritage and cultural background? That was a threat that hadn't been felt with other regimes that would have and been violent towards the Kurds.
They've been targeted by different regimes since, for example, mainly in Iraq.
Was there something different about Daesh's attitude that was different to previous threats?
Even the main crime was because they were Kurds and they were willing to preserve their identity, their culture. That's the main reason for that. It was more than any other things in their history. This is why they've been targeted they've been persecuted, they were been genocided by different Iraqi regimes. Even they acknowledged the crimes they committed against Kurds. If you look at 1979, what happens to Faili Kurds, 1983, what happens to Barzani Kurds, Anfal campaign, 1986-87, crimes during uprising, even what's going on today after 16th of October, I consider it what's going on Tos Hormato today after the crisis of 16th of October. I think that's, if you look at it as an expert in genocide, is a way, if we are not going to stop it, is going to lead to another genocides in Iraq against Kurds.
Thank you. And Dr. Naznan, if I can just turn to you, one of the distinctive features of Kurdish communities is their attitude towards women. And it is reported that 10,000 YPJ women, which no doubt you know, the Women's Protection Units, are actively engaged in defeating Daesh. That's very rare for women to be that liberated in that region. Is there anything else that you could maybe advise us or shed more light on that?
Yes, thank you. I would like to add to what my colleague Mohammed Ihsan said, that there are two main characteristics of the Kurds that make them really distinctive in the region. I mean, they are one of the oldest ethnic groups in the Mesopotamia and lived on their territory for thousands and thousands of years. The identity of the Kurds is not based on religion. This is a very distinctive feature of the Kurds. Their identity is based on culture and cultural elements, and that has made them open, tolerant, and moderate, ready to embrace secularism and integrate international human rights conventions, as well as gender equality. So this is a very strong characteristics of the Kurds. The other one is their strong sense of being stateless, their stateless status, making them really distinctive. And they are bitterly aware that they have been denied the right to statehood and to self-rule. And they have their own culture, their own language, their collective memory. They have strong bonds of identity. And the fact that they are divided between four countries with violent religious and ethnic ideologies that practice politics of elimination and mass murder, including genocide under Saddam Hussein, that has made the Kurds to be distinctive in terms of resistance. They have resisted. They resisted different politics in the region practiced against them. They resisted politics of denial, politics of physical elimination, identity, discrimination, and also extreme violence in terms of genocide practice under Saddam Hussein. And this resistance is not only related to men. Women have very strong characters inside the Kurdish society, despite the fact that this is a very traditional and patriarchal society. But women have been always considered as important actors in terms of fighting against hostility and enemies. And what we've seen in recent years, especially in the fight against ISIS, is what you've just mentioned. Yes, women, in Syria, but also in Iraq, they have been at the front of the battle against jihadists in the Middle East, the strongest force really fighting against jihadists.
Can I ask Mike just to very quickly?
Dr. Beghi, you said that there was a cultural commonality. Does that include language? Because I remember in 2013 when I went to a refugee camp near Dohuk in Iraq, the Syrian Kurdish refugees who were there, they had to find Arabic-speaking teachers for those children because under the Assad regime they had been taught in the Arabic language. Is there a commonality of linguistic connections, or has that changed? When you talk about culture, do you mean language as well?
The language, yeah, definitely. The language is a very strong aspect of culture, and Kurds have their own language. But unfortunately, because of the geographical division, which has created other boundaries among the Kurds, it has created linguistic boundaries, cultural boundaries, organizational, political boundaries, that led to cleavages among the Kurds. So you have the Kurds of Turkey who are not allowed to speak their language in public spaces, so they keep a dialect. They speak within their own dialect. The Kurds of Iraq, I'm British, but I'm of Kurdish origin. I have been denied to study in Kurdish. So when you have all these boundaries, you cannot have a standardized language. This is what happened, and your experience is exactly telling us that when you have all these divisions and boundaries, you cannot have and you cannot practice your own language. And this is one of the aspects of genocide. I mean, Kurds of Turkey have been subjected to another form of genocide, which is identity and culture. So their identity have been denied.
You want to come in?
I wondered if you could give us some comparisons of how Kurds are treated in some of the countries that have large populations of Kurds. For example, Turkey, Iran. How are they treated in those particular countries?
Do you want me to answer that?
Both of us will. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. In all parts of Kurdistan, Kurds have experienced persecution and violent ideologies, chauvinistic ideologies, and their human rights, their civil and political rights have been denied. But each part of Kurdistan, of course, carry its own specificities. Kurds in Iraq, during the Ba'ath regime for over 40 years, they have lived under the dictatorship. They experienced different forms of ideological and political violence, including, as I mentioned earlier, the Anfal genocide. And they resisted in their own ways. They organized themselves in their own ways in response to the politics of that particular state. In Turkey, the Kurds have tried to organize themselves differently. I mean, I should say that in all parts of Kurdistan, probably Syria is an exception in that sense. Kurds have tried to struggle. And they adopted armed struggle in order to resist these different forms of violence and discrimination and persecution.
When you're talking about Kurdistan, you are talking about Iraqi Kurdistan? What are you talking about?
The Kurds who adopted armed struggle for almost a century in different parts of Kurdistan have changed their strategies. In different parts of Kurdistan, they seek to establish their rights, their civil, political, cultural rights through diplomatic channels. In Iraqi Kurdistan, I'm talking about Kurds in general, and I would like to add, when I talk about Iraqi Kurdistan, I mention Iraqi Kurds or Iraqi Kurdistan and Turkish Kurds. In Iraqi Kurdistan, what happened recently, the 25th of September, the referendum, for me was part of this shift in strategies that the Kurds have tried to adopt in recent years. Through that channel, they wanted to sort out their outstanding disagreements with Baghdad peacefully, and also to establish a confederal model of governance in Iraq with greater autonomy. In Turkey, we've seen that the Kurds are still fighting. It's very unfortunate that the peace process between the Turkish state and the PKK, seeking diplomatic channels in order to resolve the problems of the Kurds in Turkey. In Iran, the same. I mean, I should say that in Iran, Kurds are not only subject to political persecution, but also to religious persecution, because the majority of the Kurds are Sunni, and as we know in Iran, it's a Shi'i regime. They have also adopted armed struggle, but they changed their policies. So in all parts of Kurdistan nowadays, the Kurds are convinced that they should resolve their problems and establish their human, civil and political rights through diplomatic channels.
Yes.
Thank you. Just a very quick final question from me, if you don't mind. The aspirations of the YPJ women, they are helping us defeat Daesh. What are they hoping for? What recognition are they hoping for?
I've talked to some of these women during my field work in the Middle East. They have really a very strong conviction and determination. When they joined the armed struggle, for them it was a kind of liberation from patriarchal norms and practices. This form of struggle and resistance was part of their liberation as women. But while they are fighting against the jihadis, almost all of them reiterated to me, I interviewed many of them, that there is no way to go back and being constrained within the family and patriarchal rules. So their aims is also, to stay active actors and no longer subjects as subjectified women.
I should have made my question clearer. What recognition are they expecting from the international community for their role in defeating Daesh?
Women as well as their colleagues, their male colleagues, they would like to receive the international support, but a kind of support, especially after what happened in Iraqi Kurdistan region, after the attack of the Iraqi army on Kirkuk and its surrounding areas, and after Iraqi Kurdistan has been taken as a hostage by Abadi and his patron Iran, Syrian Kurds draw lessons, and they are afraid to have the same, to receive the same kind of treatment once Daesh is defeated. But when I say they seek, all Kurds seek support, because we should not forget that Kurds in general, in all parts of Kurdistan, are suffering from a very difficult geopolitical constraint. And these geopolitical constraints making them vulnerable. They are vulnerable to regional powers and have been instrumentalized. They seek an international support which is based on human rights and democratic values, democratic principles that you and the UK government believe in. Not a support which is pragmatic, short-term, based on profit and interests of different Western powers.
Thank you. Nadine.
Thanks, Sharon. Professor Ihsan, Dr. Beghikani, welcome. Before I move on to the question, I just want to go back to the question of language. And a challenge that is now facing Kurds in Iraq. Am I right in saying that Kurds in the KRG region, who are under 40 years old today, actually don't speak Arabic or very little Arabic?
True.
So there's a demographic challenge here as well as a generational issue.
True. Because Kurds who were born in 1991 until now, imagine it, until 26 years now, the majority of them, they cannot speak Arabic now because they have no interaction with them. And Baghdad was so isolated during Saddam Hussein's time, and even after 2003 until now, they were fighting each other's Kurds. Kurdistan was a refuge for all educated, wealthy, professional Iraqi. They were taking Kurdistan as refuge. They started to know what Iraq means for them, really. This is why I agree with you. This is really a linguistic challenges for Kurds to, despite of all the social connection between both of us. And now when the embargo or the restriction of flight to Kurdistan, a lot of people, they are reluctant to go through Baghdad because they can't speak language. Or Baghdad doesn't mean a lot of things for them because they've been liberated, living their own way since 1991. Immediately some people, they wake up and they impose their wills or their target on them. It's not acceptable for the majority.
We talked a lot about the regional neighbours, the powers, and of course many of them, if they were here, would say the challenge to them is obviously Kurdish aspirations would challenge their sovereignty. I want to just take you sort of slightly further away to the rest of the world, the international community. Which countries would you say have been the main supporters of Kurdish aspirations? If you can elaborate, because obviously there's been, back to what the doctor described very aptly as pragmatic, short-term relationships. Maybe you can enlighten us as to which countries do you feel have taken a positive role in the international community, and which countries do you feel have taken a negative role as well when you address that in terms of the international community as you perceive it?
If you excuse me, I'll answer you directly. I remember 1991, I was working for the 40 Brigade Royal Marine. As when the first they entered, they created Safe Haven. I was liaison officer with them. I think the idea of what's going on in Kurdistan today, it started from UK. The Safe Haven before 688, if you remember, if you go back, I think
Article 688, just for the committee.
688 is the Security Council resolution. The idea before Security Council constitution, it started from here, from UK. Safe Haven, it was British initiatives to John Major time to bring Kurds from mountain to safe area, which is around the Hawk and Zaho. Then international community started to push more and came out with Security Council Resolution 688. Then it moved to no-fly zone. Then the Kurds started to go their own way for election, which means I think they started here. But what's going on today and the silence which we hear after 16th of October, mainly from UK government and Foreign Office, really it is shocking for the majority of us, and we don't understand what's going on. You were the first group who created and who protected Kurdistan. Today we know each country, they have their own interests. But what Kurds are asking for, to have a political role that we can sort out our issues politically, peacefully, not threat, not aggression, not the language which is coming on from Baghdad. That's something strange for us. And regarding the regional power, really Kurds approved since 1991 until now, I personally agree that Kurdish nationalism is a fragmented one. We are brothers, but we are not partners in politics. We are brothers, we sympathize with Kurds in Turkey, we sympathize with Kurds in Iran, and the idea which is coming on, and that's the base of today's cooperation among regional powers against Kurdistan, it's not at its place. It's going to return Kurds back to before 70s. My generation, If somebody was talking about southern Kurdistan, it was an insult for me. We were thinking about big Kurdistan. Now, the new generation, they think about piece of Kurdistan. I think that it's more encouraging regional or international community to support Kurds of Iraq, to preserve their identity, to keep them from attacks. Okay, that will be more helpful even for regional powers. We approved that since 1991. We were a key of settlement, not of a key of disturbance for Turkey or Iran, not like the act they did against Kurds after 16th of October.
Doctor, did you want to comment?
Yes, I would like to add to what my colleague just said by saying that the UK has a long history of engagement with Iraq. People sometimes just make jokes saying that the UK is the midwife of the state of Iraq. The UK has had many deals and agreements with the Kurdistan region since 1991, and especially after the fall of Saddam Hussein. There's also an informal military agreement in the fight against Daesh. There have been cultural, educational, trade deals between the UK and Kurdistan region, and Kurdistan has been a very strong ally to the UK. But it's been felt really as a disappointment. I've done some field work on this by people in Kurdistan when they saw that the UK just played the role of a bystander and not engaged into preventing the Iraqi army attack on Kurdistan region, and also did not involve in stopping Iran into strengthening into spaces, because the Iraqi army would never have been able to do what it has done without the support of the Hashdi Sha'bi and the Iranian-backed militia groups. So the UK would realize that this is going to lead to disaster, because if the Kurds in Iraq now feel they are taken as a hostage by Abadi and by Iran, and if we leave Iran to move further and to strengthen further its bases in Kurdistan and weakens further the KRG, it will lead to further violence and really religious and ethnic confrontation, not only in Iraq, but in the whole Middle East, because we are talking here about Iran and also about his men in the Middle East, including Abadi, Nasrallah, and Assad. So this is the role of the UK. And the fact that the UK abandoned the Kurds recently and in the recent crisis has been felt with bitterness, and there is a strong feeling among the Kurds that the UK has never been an important support for the UK. And what the BP done just after the attack on Kirkuk is very strongly felt among the Kurds in Iraq.
Very briefly.
Can I ask you to keep your answers a little bit shorter, please?
Very brief. So let me just sort of ask the big question. So does independence offer the best protection for the Kurds and Kurdish aspirations in Iraq? Or are there any other ways of cohabiting, coexisting within the boundaries of Iraq? And when you answer that question, if you could also address, do Kurdish movements elsewhere in the region seek independence, or are they, as I understand it, in Syria, looking only for autonomy within a Syrian state? But if you can address both those 2 points, I'd be very grateful.
Yeah, if I may. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. In all parts of Kurdistan, dream of freedom, of peace, of respect and recognition of their rights, their civil, political and cultural rights. This is the dream of all the Kurds, but they've learned from history to be pragmatic themselves and to change their strategies, as I mentioned earlier. The idea of having a pan-Kurd independent state is no longer there. Is no longer there. Kurds in Turkey, they have their own political agenda to achieve and establish their rights. Iraqi Kurds have their own agenda. Iranians the same, and as we see that the Rojava in Syria, they have their own agenda. So the having a big independent Kurdistan is no longer on the Kurdish agenda. And yes.
Sorry, we've got very limited time. So
And each part of Kurdistan, they have different struggle with different governments based on the age of the government, education of the Kurds, wealth of the Kurd, social structure of the Kurds. But the idea of a pan-Kurdishness all over, I think it goes back to 60s, no more exists. Regarding Kurds in Iraq, if Iraq were democratic, were federal, implementing its constitution, Kurds of Iraq never ever thought of going for independence or for going to referendums. Referendum, just I would like to make clear for your committee here, because still it's not clear for a lot of people. A lot of people, they think that's what's going, referendum, it was a source of current crisis. I spent 7 years of my life in Baghdad in charge of KRG office there, and I was among Iraqis who fought against Saddam Hussein with the majority of the people. When Uncloyd, she was with her supporting INC, and all times when we were knocking the doors and getting your support, at all days, we were all working hard to build federal, democratic, pluralistic, stable Iraq. We were working to create Iraqis in Iraq, not proxies for Iran, and implementing the constitution. But what's going on in Iraq after 2005 until 2011, they've never ever implement constitution, and they were looking at the constitution as if as a candy store. Things of their interest they were picking up. This is why Kurds, they end up with no option except going to referendum and listening to the peoples. And referendums, by all means, it was not a crime. Referendums is what people likes. What the reaction of international community and mainly Iraqi government is surprising all of us. We spent all of us all our life struggling for freedom, human rights, dignity, perspective, equality. We find out that even the Kurds in Iraq, they have no rights to say, I want this.
And you were going to come in.
Yes. What's been a great disappointment for many of us is that the Kurdish parliament, which was elected, democratically elected, has not met for 2 years. Now, that, I think,
I totally agree with you. That was not good move, and like all other Middle Eastern countries, all other democracies, we have our own mistakes. I agree with you, and I respect your point of view. It was not a right one, and this is why KRG and Kurdistan region, they should fix their internal, reorganize their internal home and fix their internal problem in order to get more respect from international community and go ahead.
We're going to move on, if I may. Andrew, you're going to...
Very, very briefly, because I think some of the points have already been made. But the UK, it seems to me, you feel has not stood by Kurdistan, has not been the friend to Kurdistan that you'd have hoped. That's a great shame, because I know that Kurdistan has been a huge ally, particularly over the recent issues with ISIS. What would you like the UK to do? How would you like our policies and our approach to Kurdistan changed? If Foreign Secretary was sitting here today, what would you say to him about what British policy should be towards Kurdistan?
I mean, there are many things that the UK can do. To summarize, I would say that, I mean, the fact that people got disappointed with the UK is that because they think that the UK did not respect the desire of people. They just went to express their desire through ballots, and that was not respected. But the UK could do a lot, including the UK can mobilize the United Nations members as well as NATO members to effectively engage in mediation between Erbil and Baghdad to sort out the outstanding problems. Secondly, the UK can help with the help of the United Nations to facilitate the return of over 2 million displaced people who live in Kurdistan and that created humanitarian crisis and loosened the already loose economy and public sectors in Kurdistan region. The UK...
you mean the Yazidis and any other groups that you're talking about?
You have over 2 million displaced people, internally displaced persons, but also refugees. You have people who fled Syria, Turkey, Iran.
Kurds from those regions as well?
Not only Kurds, you have also Arabs and Turks and Persians who fled the persecution of the Iranian regime. You have Shabaks, you have Kakais, you have Yazidis, you have Sunnis, Christians, Sunnis from the south and central Iraq who fled discrimination and persecution by the Shia regime, especially under Maliki. And recently, after the attack on Kirkuk, 60,000 displaced people arrived in Kurdistan region. There is a huge humanitarian crisis, and that put a lot of constraints on the economy and the public services in Kurdistan region. So the UK can engage with the United Nations to facilitate the return of these displaced people. And the other thing that the UK should do is really to help to engage with Baghdad and intervene effectively so that Baghdad do not take the Kurds as hostage and lift the air blockade on Kurdistan region, because this has isolated Kurdistan region and also contributed to the dysfunctional of the already loose political and economic system on the ground.
And I think when UK can do now, they should have better role, political role between Baghdad and Erbil. Because Erbil, we need international broker to work, because there is no trust, and Baghdad, they think they are winner. There is no such negotiations, and they are excusing for implementing constitution, which is totally, it's not true. They are implementing corruption and power against Kurds, against Kurdistan as well. And the other recommendation, I think, if I have the right to say or to suggest, I think it's a correct time for UK foreign policy to send, or from your committee, to send a group, truth-finding mission group, to see what crimes committed in Tosh-Hormatu and Kirkuk, which was not less than the crimes committed during Saddam Hussein's time. I remember 1987 when Congress, they sent a committee, a truth-finding committee to Iraq before Anfal. If they were listening to the finding of that time, we had chances to prevent Anfal at that time. I think now a UK government or UK Parliament can send a truth-finding committee to find the truth. I think crimes against humanity is being committed against Kurds, or crimes being committed against Kurds, and I have all the data, so I can give you names and pictures and everything. But the best way to send a committee there to find the truth, what's going on, and then to evaluate the future plan. Because if something like that's not happening, chances for committing new genocides exist there. And the base role for UK is to have political role for both sides. They should sit down together and negotiate.
We are short of time, so we just
One last point to add to what Mohammed said. I think the UK should not be shy and just take a public stance into stopping Baghdad to have a new system of strongman in governance, because that would lead to a disaster.
Just a very short rounding off question, because we've got to move on. There's been a referendum in Catalonia recently. We had a referendum in Scotland 2 or 3 years ago. You've now had a referendum in Kurdistan. Why do you think the British government appeared to have a different approach to these referendums? Self-determination doesn't seem to apply to some countries, it does to others. Why do you think that is?
If it was the way British government did with Scotland, if Iraqi were doing the same way with Kurdistan, I will back Baghdad and stay respecting Baghdad till the end. What they were doing that before referendum, no one from Baghdad went from Baghdad to Kurdistan to talk to Kurds, why you want to go for a referendum. I was here, I remember when Scotland people, they went for a referendum, everybody from London, they went to Glasgow, and they were talking to everybody, showing them it's better for you to be part of UK, not go your own way. But no one in Baghdad dealt with that issue in that way. And even in Catalonia, it's totally different story, because the constitution in Catalonia, they don't give them that right. But in Iraq, the constitution never say go for a referendum or don't go for a referendum. Not the way the Iraqi court, the high court, they make statements in less than 24 hours, it's approved that the court is a political tool in the hands of the government, which is another shameful for new Iraq, for new democratic process in Iraq. I hope that even the Iraqi government dealing with the Kurdish referendum the way British did, we will be more happy with that.
Just very briefly to add what my colleague said, the referendum is an expression of democracy. What lacks in this region is democracy and human rights. So the UK can contribute to develop a culture of human rights and democracy in Iraq and in the whole Middle East.
Thank you.
And this should be done through stopping Iran to strengthen its forces further.
Ian.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's important to note that obviously the KRG has said that it wants sort of calm dialogue. And to proceed on that basis, what do you think is a barrier to negotiation between Erbil and Baghdad?
I think Baghdad, they are not willing to start the negotiation process. Why? Based on my analysis, really, because the current prime minister in Iraq, he wants to be portrayed as a hero because election is coming on. And I think some foreign ministers, some foreign countries, they think that to have hero in Baghdad, in order the other factions of Shia cannot win the election. And they think that the current prime minister, he's going to stop Iran's more involved, which I personally think is no way, because not the current prime minister in Iraq had that character, and not Iraqi society is like Saddam Hussein's time no more. And Iran is so penetrated in the society, so in charge, more than anyone else can predict. This is why everybody thought that Kurds can be victims. Baghdad, still they think it's a big nose to negotiate, because they are thinking for, always the state thinks for an enemy and victim. They think the best thing that they can do is Kurds, which is under different banners, because the memory of Iraqis, unfortunately, can be measured by kilobyte, not by gigabytes. The history for them, they don't get lesson from the histories.
Thank you. And looking more broadly at the region, do Do you think it's possible for Kurdish movements elsewhere to achieve their aspirations through negotiation, or other places where where you see violence occurring in the future?
I think in Syria there is chances for negotiations. I think after what's going on in Iraq, as my colleagues you mentioned that, and YPG, they will start to engage themselves in negotiation with the regime, with Saddam, because they don't want to be, they think, betrayed between brackets, and I don't think it's betrayed. And they think they don't want to be betrayed because they think that they can be sold by American at any minute. This is why there is a chance for them to negotiate with regime, but they will never ever go back to the pre-2011 in Syria. In Turkey, with the current regime, is hopeless, and in Iran, even with current regime, is hopeless to negotiate.
Okay, thank you.
Can I thank you both very much indeed for your time. It's extremely kind of you to make time for us and to give such full and clear answers to our questions.
Thank you.
Both very much indeed.
Mr. Chairman.
Can we swap witnesses?